everybody, to Illuminate, Navigate, Radiate, a journey of emotional resilience. I'm your host, Brandon, coming with our first journey segment of June. And I'm really excited about this one because it's on a topic that I know I personally struggle with in my life and deal with it in different ways. And I know I have a great guest to kind of go into it and a big project she started that's really amazing. If you go and look at it, the link will be in the description. But I want to welcome Lou Pennisi to the episode.
Hello. Thanks for having me, Brandon.
Yeah, so thank you for coming. Lou is a grief educator and illustrator. And the project that you have started is the Grief Project. So, kind of before we really get started, do you want to just explain just a little bit of what that is?
Sure. The Grief Project is basically an Instagram page at this point, and it's I started it because I was really struggling in my own grief after my mum died, and I was unaware that I was going to be sort of hit with a whole lot of other losses over the next few years, and it was pretty much just a place for me to pour my heart out, write what I was feeling. And I just felt really isolated, felt like people were a little bit over me and getting really concerned about me. So I just took myself to Insta, started a little page, and just kind of challenged myself to write whenever I was feeling whatever I was feeling about grief and loss. And it just kind of took off from there and resonated with people. So, yeah, and kind of changed my life and helped me heal from all of it as well.
Yeah, and just looking at it, it was really awesome to see your messaging and then see the vulnerability behind it, right? Like that's it's probably one of the hardest things that we can talk about in life is grief or loss of someone, or something even at times. And so obviously, being vulnerable is must be big for you, being able to just kind of put that out there and show that. So where do you see the importance in being vulnerable and sharing your experiences and your journey with other people?
Yeah, it's really hard, and I think I mean I am a person that wears my heart on my sleeve a lot, so I'm pretty open. I'm very open with people generally, but there are times where I've written posts and haven't really overthought it, just posted it, and then the next day I've had a total meltdown, going, "Why did I put that out there? It's too much," you know. But I find every time that happens, they're the posts that resonate the most, and I get the biggest, yeah, like, what's the word? People just, yeah, it just comes back at me with so much love and so many people saying, thank you for sharing this. This is exactly how I feel. So it's always that thing where usually when I'm feeling the worst about something and I'm scared to put it out there, they're usually the posts that actually help people more. And then that in turn helps me because I realize that I'm not alone in those thoughts. I think it's so important to share our vulnerability, as hard as it is, because as soon as we share, others then share their story, and it just normalizes everything for us. You know, I think with my grief over my mum, we had a complicated relationship. So there was a lot there that I had a lot of regrets. I felt that I'd been in a lot of denial after she passed. We knew she was unwell, but I think we all just went into that real positivity mode. And so, yeah, I just think sharing helps us all heal, basically.
Yeah, and I love just that you add in not alone in those thoughts, right? I think
Yeah.
that can be this like some of the scariest feelings when you're feeling that way, and then you also on top of that you're like, oh, but I'm alone in this. I'm weak in this, or I'm crazy in this, or whatever word you want to use to
Totally.
describe it.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think that shows a really big thing, and probably by those ones where you're really vulnerable and raw, that people are like, oh, somebody finally said it out loud, right?
Yeah.
Somebody finally did. So now, it gives people the courage or the strength then to say that out loud themselves. And so I really love that aspect of it, of just especially with grief. I think it's such a hard thing to talk about. It can empower other people to let that stuff off their chest a little bit. I know, just in my life, holding those feelings of loss in have really put me in some dark moments and really put me in
Yeah.
some places that I wasn't sure I was gonna get out of it. And a big core of that was feelings of grief and trying to deal with certain losses. Um, so I love the empowering aspect behind the sharing and being vulnerable in that.
Yeah, for sure. I know. I feel the same. I had a period, a few years where I just had a lot of loss, and I got to a point where I just felt so alone, and I felt like no one would understand all these dark thoughts that I was having. And yeah, it's amazing when you do share it. And I notice it even with friends, I mean, we all hold so much inside, and there's, and that can be mixed up with shame and guilt and regret, and there's an anger, and but once we do start sharing it, and you're right, like, it's not normalized. We don't talk about grief enough. um I mean, the way that the Western world handles grief is pretty much we surround someone when someone passes, and 3 weeks later, everyone's gone back to their life, and that person's life has just completely blown up. And of course, they feel alone because everyone's just gone back to their normal lives, and they're just left in this. It's like the world's spinning around you, but you're frozen. That's kind of what it feels like. So, yeah,
Yeah, that's a really good analogy, especially when you talk about the way everything just kind of moves on, right? Like
yeah,
whether you're ready to or not, whether you got to go back to work, whether you got to be there for other family members, or whether you have your own responsibilities, they're not always going to wait on you to be ready.
yeah,
So you're almost just kind of forced into that. So of that analogy of just like everything spinning, and yet you still can feel stuck in that
totally.
moment, in that
Yeah.
process. But so where did this like journey of trying to understand grief more, or just feeling the impact it had on you personally, where did that kind of start to begin for you?
Yeah, so I guess, like, I had a pretty cruisy life until my mum passed. I really, I was very blessed in a lot of ways. I'd lost grandparents, I'd lost a couple of pets, that was kind of it. And obviously, grief is not just about death, but for me, death is what sort of made me really curious about it. And so yeah, so like I said, I lost my mom, and then about 6 months later, some friends of ours lost their son, who was 17, to cancer. And then my mother-in-law passed away, and then we lost our dog, and then we had a really close friend, a family friend, pass, who was 19, and she was in a car accident, and that affected my whole family because my children had grown up alongside Lucy, and my daughter and her were best friends, and our families were really close. So that was probably the first time I really, really looked at grief differently and looked at the way that we support other people, because I was then in that position of wanting to support these beautiful people in my life through the worst thing that could ever happen to them. And I just watched how people handled it and how people avoided them, and how people, yeah, just the way that, I mean, I can't imagine there is a greater loss. And I just wanted to be the best friend that I could be and help them walk through that time. And then we went into COVID, and Melbourne was, we had a lot of lockdowns. I think we ended up with 262 days of lockdowns over that period. So we were very isolated, and in that time, my marriage fell apart as well. So it was a lot. And I did go into a really horrible place. My whole life just kind of blew up. It was like nothing was the same. Um, so yeah, that's sort of where my grief journey began. And then through that, I had followed David Kessler for a long time. I don't know if you know him, but he's an amazing grief expert in America. And he was holding a course for grief educators, and I did the course for myself. I just thought, I'm just not in a good place. I need to process some of this grief and get rid of it and move through it somehow. And yeah, but I started doing his course and I just fell in love with all of it. And yeah, that's when I sort of actually went, I think I want to do this, and I want to work in grief. I want to work in the grief space and help more people. So yeah, that's kind of been the journey.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah.
To even to begin the process, to start the process, to go through all at one time, and then like you mentioned, then you get to the other, or you get to a part of it where then COVID happens, and so not only is your world changing in that way, but then the whole world changes,
Oh,
within an instant. And it just kind of it adds on top of that. But I wanted to ask you, as you were talking about some of that, you had mentioned that you want to be that best friend that you could be to those people in that moment, right? That best relationship.
yeah.
Um, did that take away from them processing your own feelings and emotions, or were you able, like, how did you balance those two things at the same time? 'Cause when I think about it, and I think about, at times, when I've lost an uncle or my grandma or an aunt, and everybody's trying to help everybody else in that moment, right? Everybody wants to help everybody else. But I just remember at those times, like, especially with my uncle and my grandma, like how much that hurt. And I'm trying to, like, hug my mom who just lost her mom and her brother,
Yeah.
or my cousin who just lost their dad. And where do you see that balance in processing on your own, but also obviously you want to be there for the people you love as well?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually, because I really struggled with that. It was a really strange, I've never experienced this before. I have with my children, and I'm sure you have too, where if your child's hurt, all you care about is being by their side, right? And the day that I found out about Lucy, I had that with my girlfriend Fee. All I could focus on was getting to her. I just was like, and I couldn't even believe it was real until I saw her face. I kept in my brain, I kept saying, there was so many things that told me this has happened. I mean, as I was walking into their house, the police walked past me. As I met someone at the door, they said to me, Lucy is gone. I knew she was gone, but there was something in me that was like, hyper focused to get to my girlfriend. And the second I saw her face, it was like clarity. Then I was like, right, this is really happening. I had to like really almost compartmentalize it. I was initially, it was just all about them and being there for them. But yeah, over the course of a couple of weeks, I was really like, there was no space for me to grieve. I was feeling just so focused on them and how we could help them and what we could do. And, we were doing all the meals and all the organizing, because our community was amazing and came together in such a beautiful way during that time. Lucy was pretty special. She was very loud and everyone knew her. So it was, but yeah, I had to intentionally take time to just be on my own and write about Lucy and look at photos and process my own grief over her as well. And it's been an ongoing thing. I mean, my daughter was 17 when Lucy passed. Lucy was 19. And, the night that she turned 18, I walked into her bedroom at midnight and I was like, happy birthday. You're legal. And she was sitting on her bed crying, and makes me emotional even now. It's yeah, her death has impacted us in such a huge way, and but has definitely made me a better person in terms of knowing how to support others, for sure.
Yeah, and you talking about that moment of like having to see that, right? You're so hyper focused on, like, I gotta get here. I gotta be there for this person. And so you're almost not even realizing like the weight of what just happened.
Yeah,
Um, and then it just when it hits you, it's breathtaking, right? It's like everything really does feel like it freezes in that moment when somebody or something you love so much is gone and
yeah,
is it's over. And it's such a hard thing to even for me to begin to fathom, right? It's like
yeah,
that's why I've always struggled with grief. It's just trying to process like the the finality of it, right? And the
absolutely.
impact of it.
And I think someone so young as well. I know we are not granted any time on this earth. We all know that. But there's something about parents having to say goodbye to their child and then have to live without them and, watch all their friends hit all those milestones as well. It's just, yeah. It's hard for me to fathom too, and I watch my friend do it every day. I don't know how they do it. But they're incredibly, yeah, Lucy's very alive in our lives in a lot of ways too. And I think the way that we celebrate her is, yeah, such a beautiful thing. I mean, we talk about her all the time. Whenever we're all together, we're telling funny stories about her. It's not a taboo topic, which I think is really healthy. They love hearing stories about Lucy because for them it keeps her alive. And also that thing of not feeling that people have forgotten her, because I know that was a big fear of theirs initially, was that, people would just move on and forget that she ever existed. But yeah,
No, I could see that, and I know one of the biggest losses that have occurred in my life. I lost a friend of mine, a really good friend who, we went to high school together, graduated together, got into drugs together, and he ended up ODing and passing away when I think we were 22. And I think about that at times, especially now that I have two kids of my own. Now that I was able to get clean, and I was lucky in that aspect. But um, just thinking about like missing out on those, right? Talking about losing somebody, now you're missing out on seeing that. You're missing out on seeing that growth in somebody, and
yeah,
um, you don't want people to forget. You want people to remember those amazing people that you knew how amazing they were, right? And
yeah,
you want people to share that.
for sure. Yeah, for sure.
So as you went through some of these losses, and they started to impact you, how did you kind of understand grief in those moments? Were you like kind of thinking, all right, I'm gonna kind of process this and I'm going to move on with my life? Or, is there a feeling of like hopelessness that you just can't break the feelings of grief? Like, how did you start to understand grief as as these things started to happen for you?
Yeah, I think, my take on grief was always that it was only about death, I thought, and that it was just this period of time that you went through where you felt really sad and lost, and then you came out the other side and you were back to normal. I had no concept of what it really entails, and the fact that it doesn't ever go away. It stays with you forever. But you learn to integrate it into your life, and yeah, and that it's like the yin and yang of everything. It's like it doesn't mean as well that you're always miserable and that life is just horrible for you. I think early grief can feel that way, and for me, after my mum passed, I just it wasn't just even the emotional fallout, it's the physical as well. I couldn't sleep. I'd go to bed really early because I was exhausted. I had nothing left in me. And I would just pretty much cry myself to sleep. But then I'd be awake at like 2 a.m. and I'd lay there all night till 6 a.m. and just be like, why can't I sleep? My hair was falling out. I couldn't eat. I felt so unmotivated. I've never felt, just didn't care about anything. I didn't care about feeding my family. I didn't care that I needed to clean my house. It was just like I was clearly like, I guess I was depressed. Um, I never got any diagnoses or anything like that. But and then, obviously, though, you have to keep moving. You have to keep doing the things we do. You need to earn money. You need to do all these things. But as things, kind of piled on top of me, I think it wasn't until after my husband left that I really started to process. And I think a big part of that was just being on my own and having the headspace to do that. My children are older. Two of them still live with me. Well, they were all living with me at the time, but they were young adults, you know what I mean? So they didn't need my time as much. And I think I really became quite selfish in that. I just really, but it was a survival. It was survival, like I needed to, yeah, just be alone. I did a lot of writing. I've always written when I'm struggling with things. So I just really dived into bringing everything back to simplicity. I cooked really basic meals. I, tried to exercise, just get out for a walk, just do little things to help me. And as that, that was just like little building blocks to rebuild my life basically and start again. Sorry, my voice has gone.
Oh, you did.
Yeah. So yeah, it's been a long process, and it doesn't happen overnight. But I started meditating every day. Um, yeah, things like that. Just even walking outside and putting your feet on the grass, and grounding yourself, and just all those little things helped me come back to who I am now.
Yeah, and those are all really good, like little things to do that with, right? I love that you talked about that simplicity of it, like simplifying things in life. I feel like can be so important when you're going through those tough
Yeah.
moments, right?
Yeah. I see so many people, sort of lose someone, and then they just push themselves so hard to just live their normal life. And the thing is, you can do that for a while, but it catches up with you eventually, And I think for me, because there was just so much piled on top of each other, I had no choice. I was just in a world of pain. I didn't know which way to turn, so I had to just bring it all back. And even my friendships, my relationships over the last few years, I've really kind of culled a lot of the negative stuff out, the people that sort of dragged me down, or just didn't really support me. And look, there's still plenty of people in my life that I love that couldn't support me, and that's fine. I get that not everyone has that capacity. But I went through a phase where I was really angry at the world. I was really angry at certain friends that I felt didn't support me. And yeah, but it's all a learning lesson. And I also realized that a lot of that grief, no matter how many people are around you, a lot of the grief you do go through on your own. Well, for me anyway, I find it's very personal. It's so different for everyone. And yeah, most of mine I've gone through on my own.
Yeah, no, for one, just being that you saying that selfish aspect of it, right? I think there has to be a level of selfishness through life in order to figure out who you are and figure out how you process things. And when you go through hard times, because you know, in recovering from addiction and being in addiction, I have to have this little bit of selfishness to
Yeah,
be a good dad, to be a good husband, to be a good, employee at work. Because if I don't take care of that and I start, using again, I'm not gonna have any of that stuff anyway. So there, I
yeah,
think that little bit of selfishness is okay at times, and I think that's hard for people to say or admit that we need that at times.
yeah.
Um, but I love hearing that from somebody else with
I
with
agree
my
with you. And,
mindset.
Yeah, I met my husband when I was 20 and we broke up when I was 48. And, I felt like I just went through this whole identity crisis. I didn't know who I was without him. So it was really, I think the building that some people do in their 20s and the learning about themselves, I did in my late 40s. And I was like, you know, yeah, had to totally rebuild everything and work out what I wanted for my life. And you have to be selfish to do that, right? You need that time to, yeah, to be able to work it all out.
Oh, I think that is really true, and something that probably more people need to be okay accepting at times and realizing. And then I also wanted to just like ask you about like that grief journey, right? And that's why I think a lot of those little things that you talk about it come into play. Is that from my experience, and it sounds a little bit to yours as well. But it's not something that it's just gone one day. And I think, when there's some days that are worse for me than others, there's some days where, I can look back and really focus on those good times and really focus on the positive times. And there's days where I really focus on I could have done something different times. And those days
Yeah.
where, it's harder to manage those feelings. And so then I get a little bit more down that day, or I'm a little bit more emotional that day. But I think coming to the realization and the understanding, like I'm gonna have those days, and that this is probably gonna go on for, if not my entire life, most of my life, of dealing with
Yeah.
these things and them coming back up and finding new ways to work through them. Um, I think that's such an important thing to realize and accept. Because have you found like understanding that more, that it is kind of like a long time journey with grief, that it I don't want to say easier, because I don't think grief ever gets easier, but maybe more manageable, if that's the right word.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think a big part of it is accepting that. And like I said, I thought grief was this period you went through, and then the realization, like after my mum died, I'd noticed that, I'd kind of get a couple of months down the road and I'd have a day where I'd think, oh, I'm doing really good. I'm over it. And I swear the next day the universe would just go, no, you're not over it. And it would just pound me down again. And I was just like, I really got paranoid that every time I thought I was okay, something bad was going to happen. But I realized that it's actually, yeah, I mean, the grief over someone dying is really your love, right? It's all the love that you've got that you now don't have anywhere to put. And that love doesn't die when they die. Like you love those people forever. So you're always going to have moments. I mean, my mum died 7 years ago now, and we had Mother's Day about a month ago in Australia. And last year I was really good. I was fine on Mother's Day. This year I woke up and I got a message from my niece, and I just started crying, and I just was like, I just want my mum today. I just wish I could just have lunch with her. And it just hits you at different times. And I think a big part of processing your grief is not fighting that anymore. At the start, I would fight it and be like, what's wrong with me? Why am I crying again? Like, I should be over this by now. And once I realized that actually this is just part of it, and it's these things are going to come up at different times over the years. And like you say, maybe for the rest of my life, I don't know. Um, and even my marriage, sometimes it still takes my breath away when I think, oh my God, that's done now. That's over. Um, it's just, I think, yeah, once we learn to accept it and sit with the grief rather than pushing it down, pushing it away, keeping busy, like now I can feel it coming and go and sort of be more curious about it and go, okay, what's going on for me? Like, why am I feeling like this? Sometimes there's no reason. It's just pure emotion. Maybe it's hormones. I don't know. But I just let it out now. I just let it out and maybe write about it and sort of process it and then move forward. And it seems like you say it's not easier, but I think we get stronger and we get better at learning how to manage it. And yeah, you kind of end up with a little toolkit of knowing the things that work for you, you know. At first I was just scrambling. I was lost. I didn't know how to make myself feel better. I thought I was going to feel that way forever. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it was just you talking and mentioning that little toolkit, right? Those things that work for us, that's what helps us become stronger and
Yeah.
makes the things a little more manageable. Because I think that ties into what you said earlier about grief being such a personal thing. I think that's so true because we all handle that differently, and yeah, we want to be there for somebody, but the weight of grief or who we lose or what we lose can just be so different for everybody, and
Yeah.
I think the way we feel things is just different. It's hard for me to like verbally tell you exactly what I'm feeling because they're my feelings and it's my process. So I think there's always going to be that little bit of a difference, and so finding what works for you, right, is such a key part to
Yeah. Definitely. And like it's such a different experience for everyone. And even every relationship you have, the grief will be different, you know, depending on, if you've had a terrible relationship with your father your whole life, for example, that grief, when they pass, there can be a lot of sadness for what you didn't have. Um, and yeah, a great relationship where it was, I mean, I have people on my page saying that their mother was their best friend. They spoke to them 4 times a day, it's so different for all of us, and things that comfort me won't necessarily comfort you as well. That's why it's tricky to support people in grief, because you don't know what people need. But I think the biggest thing is to just be really vulnerable with people and be honest and say, I don't know what you need. I don't know what's going to help you, but I'm here for you and I'm willing to do whatever that is going to be for you, and keeping those lines of communication open and not just avoiding it, because that's what a lot of us do, is just feel like it's put it in the too hard basket. Oh, I'll get to that. And it ends up being awkward. You end up running into that person in a supermarket or something, and then you have that awkward thing of like, oh, I was going to call you, it's just so much healthier when we're vulnerable and say, even if you say, I don't know what to say to you, I don't know what to do for you, I just want you to know I love you, it can
and
be
and
as
yeah, and I think that really goes back to that simplifying things, right? You're not
mm,
trying to force or overcomplicate somebody else's
yeah,
healing process.
it
And
actually is pretty simple. Yeah.
yeah, and I
But
think
we humans
yeah,
complicate it all.
overcomplicate everything.
Yeah.
But I think with going along, and then you look at the other side of that vulnerability you're talking about of me saying I don't know how to help, but then me sharing my feelings about it, that hopefully helps other people be like, okay, well, I don't know what I need from you, but this is just what I'm going through. This is where I'm struggling. And then, that's where I think sharing experiences and vulnerabilities is such a powerful thing in life, because it helps us realize, we can share these things and we're not going to be looked down on, or we're not going to be made
Yeah.
fun of or seen as weak, or, whatever we tell ourselves we're going to be seen as.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
So
and just kind of like, going into losing that relationship. Um, what is how do you see grief in losing something other than through death, right? Like that aspect of grief.
yeah, I think it's really important that we stay open to the fact that grief isn't just about death. I thought it was for a long time. Um, I do get a little bit of kickback from people on my page sometimes if I talk about, say the loss of a marriage, is there's grief in that. Um, your children growing up and moving out of home, there's grief in that. There's grief in anything really that is a change in life that we don't want or are not prepared for, I think. Um, yeah, it does trigger people a little bit because some people, but you just also, another big thing is you can't compare losses. You should never compare losses. You can't compare the loss of a marriage to the loss of a child. Like, of course, they're totally different things. And what comes out of that is, yeah, the pain is different. It's a different reality. Um, so yeah, I think we just need to be really kind to each other and witness each other's grief and not judge it. That's the biggest thing. Is there's so much judgment on how people do grief, and you can't do grief wrong, right? Like, whatever comes up for you is meant to come up for you. How long we grieve for is another judgment. She should be over that by now. Like, it's been 2 years. Like, no one can tell another person how quickly they process things or should process things. Um, and yeah, we're probably also our worst own enemies in some ways and gaslight ourselves out of our own grief. I mean, there's been times where I've done that to myself, just going, I feel like I'm just stuck in this. What's wrong with me? Why am I doing this? But I would never say that to a friend, right? I'd be like, no, you take all the time in the world. So I think a big part of it too is being really kind to ourselves and giving ourselves the time and space to feel it all and not judge ourselves.
Yeah, no, I think I love that aspect just about the judgment thing. And I think it's almost like a standard. I don't know how it is in Australia, but you have those bereavement days or closure days. My kids are going a little crazy in the background, but like it tells you like, okay, you got 3 days to grieve this person. Oh,
Yeah,
if it was a parent, you got 5 days. If it was an aunt, you got one day. If it was a friend, well, you just need to come back to work.
yeah,
And and like you were saying earlier, that relationship could be so different. Somebody's aunt could be like their best friend or their mom, and
yeah,
now just because of that relationship, there's a judgment there. Well, it wasn't your mom. Well, it wasn't
yeah,
this type of person, and so it's almost set up to like, well, these are the standards you should grieve as. And this is what what you should do, and then also the comparing thing I think plays a role in that too, right? Like, oh, well, I
yeah,
was able to get over this sooner, or how are you like, why can't I get over it and you're over it, or seem like you're over it, or whatever wording you want to use
yeah,
there. But I think that can make it, that's that comparison judgment thing that we're gaslighting ourselves into thinking we should be a certain way, when in reality, like we've said a couple times now, like going through your own process and your own grief is what's going to be important in that.
yeah, yeah. I agree totally.
Yeah, and when it comes to that aspect of it, like, and I just kind of, I guess I want your opinion or viewpoint on this is, when I did when I did start in recovery, when I got into recovery, I look at my life before recovery, and like I was a pothead, I was a partier, I was, this, like, that's just what I kind of embraced that, even though there's a lot of pain, a lot of negativity behind it, I felt like that's what I was. And
Yeah,
so even though it was something so negative and it brought so much negativity, I think there was a process of like struggling to let go of that, because it was like that identity aspect of a big part of who I was. And it just made me think of it because you had mentioned that self identity and that
yeah.
relationship and everything. So like, even if it's some like negative things, do you think that's hard to let go of sometimes when it comes to like being a part of you?
Yeah, I've read this and heard this a lot actually through addiction, that yeah, it becomes a part of your identity. And like anything, I mean, if you're a partier, you
Yeah.
end up with friends that are sort of in that similar line. So it's definitely the identity thing's big. And I have a friend at the moment who's given up alcohol, and that's been a big topic of conversation. Um, Same thing, like, but I'm a boozer. Like, that's who I am. Like, that's how everyone knows me. Like, who am I without that? And yeah, I agree. It's yeah, I mean, I went through that with the marriage thing. It was very like, who am I? Like, I was pretty much a child when we met, and I was I was never known just as Lou. It was Lou and Charlie, Lou and Charlie, you know. So it's like, um, yeah, it alters everything, and it really alters relationships with people too, right? Like some people don't want to let that part of your identity go. They love that part of you. They love the broken parts of you, you know, and it can be really interesting when you do heal the people that are a little bit affronted by that. You know, they kind of like seeing you in that place, or they not maybe not even like, but are used to seeing you in that place. That's how they identify with you as well.
Yeah,
So
no,
yeah,
that's interesting just because I can think of even if that relationship wasn't completely changed because of that, some of the things I would do in those relationships were changed because sometimes I would overcompensate for the fact that I knew I was lying to this person about using, and I knew I was going behind the back about using. So then I was like ultra nice or really
yeah,
nice or whatever in those moments. So it just changed some of my habits within those relationships because I didn't feel like I need to do stuff over the top because I wasn't going, into the bathroom and shooting up or whatever and in the meantime. So that's
yeah,
interesting how like people like I think struggle with that as well. Like other people can
yeah,
struggle with those changes as well.
yeah, for
Um,
sure.
and then I wanted to ask you, because you had mentioned it when you were kind of introducing yourself and going into it, but you had talked about being in that like really hard moment and dark moment, and then you really wanted to like kind of take that course for you, and really with the idea it sounded like to just kind of help yourself through that
Yeah.
grief and what it ended up becoming. But like, was there something that you had experienced, or was there like just like a light bulb moment or something that was like when you saw that course or you saw him talking, like what was it being in that moment, and then what was that like push, I guess, to put you on that path to where you're at right now and doing what you're doing?
Yeah, it was so random. I mean, I was literally just scrolling on Instagram and saw David Kessler's post saying that he was running his first grief educator course, and I just instantly I thought, I won't be able to afford it. That was my first negative thought. But I was also in a place where I was like, really wanting to, I was really over myself, to be honest. I was getting really sick of how I was feeling. And I was just like, how do I was, I'd done some therapy. I was writing a lot. But I felt really stuck in it. And, so when I looked at the pricing, I was like, okay, that is actually doable. I can do it. And at the time, I just had a really good friend that I spoke to about it. And he was so positive and said to me, you should do this for yourself. Like, do it. You deserve it. You've been through a lot. Um, and then, yeah, it was just, I think David Kessler's really gentle in his approach. I guess I align with him a lot in that he's very non judgmental. He really works through shame and guilt and regret, and really makes you think about the fact that we have no control. I think we all have this sense that we could do better. We can always do better. We always feel like I should have spent more time with that person, and his approach is really like it doesn't matter what you did or didn't do, the end result would still be there. So it really helped me process my mum, in terms of the regrets I had, and that I was in such denial about her dying. And then I think it made me focus more on the page, and it altered things a little because it became less about my emotion and a little more about education. And I really started thinking, okay, well, it's not just, this page isn't just for grievers, it's also for people that want to support people who are grieving. And I was often getting messages from people saying, how do I help my friend who's just gone through this? What do I say to her? And so I really sort of shifted the focus a little to be also about how to help others, if you're struggling with what to say or what to do. And again, they're pretty basic things, but yeah. And then it just the course itself over the 12 weeks, I processed so much. It was incredible. And I did another course with him earlier this year, which was writing through grief and loss and trauma, which was really fascinating too. It was him and another lady who's a writer, and it was all based on how important it is for us to get this stuff out of our bodies, you know, and writing is such a key thing to help that if that's for you. It's like a lot of people think they can't write, you know, they just think they need to write a book. But it's really interesting because when I write, when I'm in a hard place, I often don't know what I'm feeling. You know, it's like I'm not really good at knowing where I'm at emotionally. But when I write, it just comes out. And it's kind of like, it's almost like it takes over. And I write it all out. And then I go, okay, that's where I'm at, you know? And so it's really good for processing. But yeah, so it just sort of changed everything because it then started making me go, okay, like what I'm doing now, because I'm an illustrator and I have my own business, it's very fun and I love it, but it's not really helping anyone. You know what I mean? It makes kids' bedrooms look prettier and you know, gives a bit of joy that way. But for me, the grief stuff just really feels like I feel so pulled towards it because I can see it helping people, and people say to me, and I just don't have a better feeling than when someone says to me, your page has helped me navigate this grief. Like, it's the biggest compliment ever to know that what I went through, the hard stuff that I've been through, is now helping other people feel that there is some hope and that they feel less alone. Yeah.
Yeah. No, you know, being in that moment, and just being, you know, tired and, you know, you said, you know, almost over yourself or sick of
I
yourself. And,
was.
you know,
Yeah.
in recovery, I hear, you know, we get sick and tired of being sick and tired basically. And so that's what
Yeah.
it was reminding me of.
Yeah.
But like just hearing that and going through that and not only kind of start turning it from your own healing process, but an educational process. And I think that's really big because I think if we're open to learning ourselves, even if we're talking about certain things that maybe we've experienced or we've gone through, if we always keep that open mind, then we can always keep adding more to what we're doing instead of that, like, you know, this is how you do it. This, if you want to be better, this is what you say. This is how you say it. This is where you say it. And then boom, they are better.
Yeah.
You know, so when you know, thinking about that educational standpoint, I think is so important, because then it helps you continue to grow as you're you know showing that to other people, and then you add the vulnerability into it, and it just becomes really real and relatable. And I think those are some of the biggest things that at least I've learned in my life. I used to work at a youth center where I'd go into schools and juvenile centers and in you know sports environments, and I'd just talk about different life things and processing that and going through that. And I did it in a very real, relatable, raw way. And it always seemed like I had a better relationship with the people I was talking with when it was that, as opposed to when I was like, okay, well, I got to hit a certain point because it's what my job is telling me to do. No, I'm gonna get there my own way because I know that's gonna work a little bit better.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, authenticity is key, right? Like if you can
Mhm.
be authentic with people and be and put wear your heart on your sleeve a little bit, it of course they're going to resonate more than if it's just an instructional, this is what we need to do kind of vibe. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
so
and
powerful.
it is, and I want to go back to just you know something else you said in that of because I think this is especially when it comes to my friends that is one thing that I really I still struggle with at times to this day. It's like even if you know you did or didn't do those things or did or didn't say those things, that end result is still gonna you know still gonna be the same. And I think that can be such you know, it's a sucky thing to think about that it would still end that way, because you want to be able to say, well, okay, something could have changed. But I think that's something that just really hit home with me. That is something to keep in mind when I'm in those moments of struggling. And I do find, you know, I would agree with you that I think writing is such a big tool. I just I went through something the other night where I was having trouble processing things, so I just pulled out my phone and I started making this note, and it went from me talking in third person to me like I was talking to somebody, to
Yeah,
like it just like went through all these different things. And even
yeah.
though like if somebody else read it, probably wouldn't make a whole lot of sense, but
I know, isn't it crazy how it
yeah,
just
it really
just
helped me
sums
just
it up?
okay,
Yeah.
this is where I'm at, this is what I need to do next.
Yes, yes, it's amazing. It is amazing when when you just when you let it go, when you're not trying to be a poet and trying to
Mhm.
write some amazing thing, it is amazing what just comes out. And like I said, sometimes I just am like, oh, that's how I'm feeling. Okay, it kind of just clarifies things for me. My brain is very busy. It's really hectic. So and I'm a person that when I'm confronted, I kind of shut down. So it's really hard for me to be in a moment with a person and express myself properly. I often have to go away, write, and then I can come back and go, okay, this is how I feel about this. It's a really bizarre thing, but
No,
it's
I think I can relate to you on that in a big thing. Whenever
yeah,
it comes to, even if it's just like 2 or 3 minutes, I feel like I just, you
yeah,
know, I don't want to look at that person for those 2 or 3 minutes while I
yeah,
process things and start to figure things out. And then that way
yeah,
I know I'm gonna come with a more logical approach than just nothing but
yeah.
feelings coming out
Hey,
and how I
I
feel
just
in that moment.
Yeah. I just want to say as well, like in terms with your friend as well, I was just thinking as you were talking, I'm sure as well that because in that time you were using,
Mhm.
there's probably a lot of grief that you didn't get to process in the moment because you were probably numb to a lot of it. So it's quite normal for you to like years later still be having a lot of thought about that and stuff. Now you're in a healthy space as well. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I did. That ended up spiraling into one of the the worst few months probably of my addiction, to where I was just like I had to keep doing more and more and more because I couldn't even have it. I just had to do it until I was passed out 24/7, because I
Yeah.
didn't want that on my mind.
Yeah.
And it was a couple years after I gotten clean, when I knew right away that was something I need to handle. When I was in rehab, I even brought that up to my counselor. I was like, "Hey, this is something I know is gonna come up a lot in my life, and I need to face it and try to work through it." But I remember I was just like, I was working a night shift job, and I was coaching soccer as well. So I had just gotten out of, a night shift job. I was up all day the day before. I'm driving to a soccer tournament across state. I think I've been up for like 40 hours, and this song came on the radio that reminded me of my friend, and I bawled. And I just cried all the way to that game where I got out of the car, and a couple of the parents were looking at me like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, just processing some stuff." But it just
Yeah.
came at me so hard, and like I couldn't even be like, "Hey, Brandon, you're about to go coach. You're about to go do this. You need to get focused. All right." I couldn't even give that pep talk. It was just like a mess coming out of me.
Yeah.
And so that's where, it's still that work in progress for me, that I think there was even then pain I had to deal with because of then my behaviors and my actions after that. Um, and so I think it's like you said, it's that journey, it's that process. But it is, I do appreciate you saying that that's normal, that especially because of where I was at,
Yeah.
that like that grieving process really for me started years later, because I wasn't able
Mm,
to truly do that in that moment. So I do appreciate you
yeah.
kind of saying that and showing that. Um,
Yeah.
we just like kind of, going through this now, right? You're putting yourself out there. You're being really vulnerable. You're speaking of things that I know for me are really hard, even as we're talking about that a little bit, it's kind of hard for me to like, okay, how, I'm thinking through how I'm singing it. And almost like I can feel myself like, okay, don't cry, yeah, because I'm a crier, so don't, yeah, don't
Cry.
do it.
You can cry around
Um,
me, no problem.
yeah, no, but like, have you had moments since starting this where um it hits you harder, and then you do kind of go back to that mindset of like, okay, I'm doing this, I'm showing the world this, like I gotta be stronger right now than what I'm actually able to pull off? Or are you really okay with those moments where maybe you don't feel so strong?
It's interesting. I'm okay with not being strong all the time. I'm like I said, I'm good at leaning into it now, but I do find that when I'm in that, I can pull away from my page a bit until I've processed it, and then I'll talk about it. I find it hard to do it when I'm in the zone. Um, it's and it's funny because with the page, I mean, there's a lot of. I don't think it's a sad space. I think it's quite positive, but I do get a lot of private messages from people telling me their stories, which I feel so honored that people share with me. It's amazing. But there are times where it's a lot, and I have to just pull back and emotionally kind of regroup myself because, yeah, some people's stories are so incredibly heavy, um, and like I say, it's so beautiful that they'll share them with me. But yeah, there are times where I just have to manage it. I have to make sure that I'm okay as well. Because if I'm not okay, I can't help anyone. Um, but yeah, it's I feel like it doesn't take me down the way it used to. I mean, it used to be a case that when it hit me, I could be just really down for 2 or 3 days. Whereas now I feel like because I allow it to come, it sort of passes through quicker. It's like, okay, this is what's happening, and I can sit in it. But there are also times where I know I just keep busy and push it
Yeah.
away. I mean, like everyone, we all, none of us are perfect at it. It's
No.
just like there are times where I'm just like, oh, okay, I'm so not feeling right now. I'm just not feeling anything. Yeah. So yeah, it's just a journey, like all of us.
Yeah, no, and I think I'm like just going back to the that selfish idea and what you just mentioned there, where I think that's an important thing for people to always keep in mind. Like e- even as much as you want to help and as much as you want to be there for people and do all that, like you still have to have those selfish moments to where it's not going to overwhelm you and it's not going to set you back. Because I'm a very empathetic person, and maybe me just saying this out loud right now reminds myself not to do that, because
Yeah,
I have had a habit of doing that since getting clean, where especially working in the environments I've worked in, and being around some hard situations, or
yeah,
some sad situations. And, sometimes I don't always remove myself from it. So then I carry that, and then I
yeah,
carry the next one, I carry the next one, and eventually just it puts me down on the ground. So I
yeah,
think
for sure.
those are really important things to remember.
Yeah,
That it's okay to take that time for you, so that way then you can continue to give back in a way that you're doing. And I don't think it's a sad, it's kind of a I guess I don't know, it's interesting now that I'm thinking and about to say it, but it's not a sad space that you
yeah,
have. Maybe I think it's uplifting and empowering, that like, because I do see, and that's kind of my own feelings about it, but I do see grief as something that we don't always talk about. We don't always want to talk about. And it's almost like I think there feels like there's a lot more spaces in the world where you're not supposed to talk about grief than there actually is.
yeah,
And that's what I see in your page, and what drew me into your page, and me reaching out to you was just like, this isn't a dark setting, and all about the pain and the real struggle behind it. It's just a real message of like trying to do this in different ways you can do this. And I'm a colorful person, so I always like the colors
Yeah.
and everything like that. But it's definitely a really cool space that you've created, and one that I think is really, really important with how we handle grief in today's society, whether that's me personally, or whether that's some of society standards for like the way we should heal and
Thank
process.
you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And so as we kind of get close to wrapping up our conversation here, I always like to let the person coming on have the kind of the last word, last bit of advice, last little tip, last whatever it is that you want to share. But don't worry, I'll talk for a second so you can kind of maybe figure something out.
Okay.
But I really do appreciate you coming on and talking about this. This was one I was really looking forward to, just because grief. I realize that I struggle with it, and it's something that I have to find different ways to work on it, because I found ways that don't work for me, or that make it worse later on. And so I really appreciate the space you're creating and what you're doing, and then coming on and having that conversation with me today.
Thank you. I also really love talking to men about grief, because I feel like us women will talk about it till the cows come home, but I've even noticed, like, I can be at a party or something, and someone will say to me, a man will say to me, "What do you do?" And as soon as I bring up grief, they just go, "Ugh." Like, yeah, cool, okay, don't want to talk
Like,
about it. Don't even want to know what I do,
yeah.
you know what I mean? It's like too confronting. So I think it's so special that you are, like, not only the work you're doing anyway, but that you're willing to talk about this and actually be vulnerable and say, I find this really hard. It is really hard. It's hard for all of us, but I think for men it's even more complex because of the way that we shut men's emotions down, and so yeah, I really appreciate you asking me to come on. It's been such a cool talk. I could talk to you for another 3 hours.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed it. It's been a really easy going conversation and flow to it and everything. But yeah, no, I think that's I feel like I definitely get more responses from women to like talk about their journey and their thing as well.
Yeah,
But I do think it's really important, because I see it at times, or maybe I've even gotten like looks or something said to me, like I was in a school I was specifically in a class that like was it was helping you learn about how to work on cars, and like just that environment, right? And
yeah,
so there was a lot of kids that I think grew up in a spot where they don't talk about their feelings, because they let me know. I'd go in there once a week for about 12 weeks, and they'd let me know, like, oh, we don't really care. We like you. We don't really care what you're talking about, because that's not what we do. We don't talk about our feelings in here. We don't, like, you can come in and have a conversation with us, but there was always one or two of those moments where they were really vulnerable, and like we
yeah,
talked about something that hit home specifically for one of them. But it just goes to show how tough that can be for guys. And I share that story because they're 15 to the 17-year-old, young men.
yeah,
They're learning at that age that I'm not supposed to talk about this. And I think that's where that
yeah,
it can be important to just kind of be that a little bit more often, and say like, yeah, I'll come here and cry in front of you guys. That doesn't make me any less than, it doesn't make me any less of a person. I'm okay with that at this point in my life.
yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's so important, especially that age. I think that's where a lot of boys shut down emotionally and then never come back from it. So I love seeing there's a few men in Australia actually. I've just sort of started following recently that are doing amazing work with going into schools and doing chats with kids
Yeah.
and getting really vulnerable and talking about bullying and talking about all sorts of emotional stuff. And I think it's so important. Like, it's just, that's the future, right? If we don't teach these kids how to express themselves, then we're just going to keep going the way we're going, which is not great right now, is it?
It's scary sometimes. I don't know how scary it is over in Australia, but here it can be a little wild some days. Um,
Yeah, I think your
um,
country's a little off tap at the moment.
yeah, probably. I could just imagine the way you guys are looking over here, but but I think like
Uh,
what you just said is that's how we continue to be better, and we because even growing up, I remember not even talking about mental health things. I went through things as a kid, and my parents put me into anger management because that's what
yeah,
they thought it was, and that's no fault to them, but it just wasn't a conversation that was being had at that
yeah,
age.
yeah,
And so yeah, I just think as long as we can continue to do that, hopefully, right, we can continue to have that impact and kind of change that environment about these things. So hopefully I gave you enough time there to come up with something. Yeah, still gonna throw it over
I
to you for
know.
that
I'm so in
last
the
little thing
conversation, I'm
there.
not thinking. All right, I've got something, I think. Let me just, yeah. I guess it's just a little message to anyone out there that is, maybe in early grief or really struggling, feeling stuck in their grief. Um, and I would just say to be really kind to yourself and take time, even if it's 5 minutes a day that you can find. I know it's really hard when you're a mother or a father or, just doing all the things that we have to do. But if you can just sit with yourself for 5 minutes a day or 10 minutes a day, and I often get asked, like, people often say, I want to process, but I don't know how to. I don't know how to get it out. I don't know how to feel emotion. And so I would just say to find anything that brings up emotion for you, whether it be like a song, like you said, certain music just brings it on, whether it's writing, whether it's looking at old photos, sometimes that can bring up stuff, or videos, whatever it is that makes you feel something. Try and practice that 5 or 10 minutes a day, because then it becomes easier to feel again. And through that, you start to process and move through it, and try to keep moving. Because I think a big part of grief as well is that we become really stagnant. Because we feel so unmotivated and so lost, we can just literally sit in it. Um, and I notice things like, gardening, just getting out, going for a walk. I bought a hula hoop. That was a big thing for me. Like, I just like doing things even that you did as a child that brought you joy. I think all those little things, things that give you joy, sort of start to lift you out of that sad space as well. So yeah, if you're struggling, give some of those little things a go. Like, just try and be really kind to yourself though, and stop your thoughts from being negative. Like, I think when we really tune into the way we speak to ourselves, it's incredible how awful we can be to ourselves. So yeah, just be kind to yourselves and take time, and try not to judge yourself or anyone else for how they're grieving. They're
Yeah.
my words of wisdom. How's that?
That was wonderful too. That was really good. And again, Lou, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing, your experiences and what you've learned through your time doing this. Definitely recommend going to check out Lou's page if there's anything that you've struggled with or you can relate to, which probably 99% of the world probably can. And so the her link will be in the description of this video. But again, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brandon. I appreciate it too. We finally got it happening. It was a journey, but we got it.
Yeah, especially
Yeah,
with the 14-hour difference.
exactly.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you again. Thank everybody for listening and checking us out. It's been Illuminate Navigate Radio. Have a great rest of your day.